Fabulous. I'll just... I'll just keep my eye on and see if anybody else wants to join. Okay, so we'll get started, Michael. So, hi everyone. Welcome to this More to Life webinar with Michael Hughes, who's here to talk about men and childlessness. It is my greatest pleasure to welcome Michael here tonight in the UK and morning in Australia, where Michael is based. Michael is one of the creators, producers, and presenters of the Full Stop podcast and community. He's here tonight to talk about his experiences of being childless, not by choice, and about men and childlessness. I know this is going to be an amazing evening. So Michael's going to give us a wee sort of introduction to his about his childlessness journey. And what I just want to say is I just want to sort of say we welcome questions at any point during the session. Please post these in the chat function and I will read them to Michael. The event is being recorded so that it can be shared later on the FM UK website and YouTube channel. Okay, so hi Michael, hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Anna, and thank you so much for this. I really appreciate and humbled by the invite to come here and talk to you all. I can see a number of names here that I know, so this is going to feel a little bit weird because I'll be telling them a story that they already know. But yeah, look.
Can I just start? Can I ask Robert? Could you turn the camera off for me, please? Thank you very much. I don't know how. If you don't mind, just so that, yeah, thanks, brilliant.
Yep.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you there.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. So, yeah, look, it's the sun's not even up down here in Australia. It's going to be about 29, 30 degrees today. So it's actually quite a nice time of day to actually do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I'm really, really honoured to be asked to come and speak as a childless man because as I think we will get to, this is something that doesn't often happen. So thank you, Anna.
Yeah, and I think it's really, really important that we start talking about men and childlessness. I think it's a really, really important area to raise. So I'm really, really pleased that you're here to talk about it. Thank you.
So I guess a bit about me, and this I'm going to go back to the 1940s. Now, it is important, and it does have a bearing on where I'm going with our chat today. So, I identify as a Gen X generation, and I think you will never see the likes of us again, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is because I think about, I've done a lot of soul search due to family dynamics at the moment, done a lot of soul searching about being a childless man, being a Gen Xer. And I have to talk about my parents first of all. So quickly, that my dad, born in 1940, brought up in a very Catholic household in Glasgow. He doesn't speak well of that childhood, and he started his apprenticeship at the Clydebank shipyards, and then as soon as possible, he's left home. He's working on in the Merchant Navy on oil tankers, traveling the world. At the same time, my mum was born about 1940 to 1942, war-torn London. Her father was killed in Italy with the offensive at the end of the war, coming up from North Africa into Italy. And so she was brought up by her mum, my nan, single mother with 2 children, and also her mother, who had terminal brain cancer, and her brother, who had severe post-traumatic stress syndrome from the war. And so my nan, she was looking after all these people as well as having a full-time job to support everyone. Now, both my parents' stories are important because what that did for me as a young kid was I grew up in a household that there was no emotion shown. So I grew up never hearing my parents say they love me. And not to say they didn't, but this is how I grew up. And so I would hear very often, there was not a lot of empathy in my house either. Because as you can imagine, my mum has grown up in a household where, and in her own words, well, you just had to get on.
Yeah.
You just had to get on. And so that created an independence and a resilience. And then my dad, he was, as I said, a house devoid of love. And so he did not know how to behave in that nurturing sort of way because he had no role model to have based that on. And so I was born in London. We moved out into the Essex countryside, and I had an idyllic English countryside village childhood that with my parents, as we've talked about, I have become quite a resilient and independent person because I've just got to get on. And so, and then of course you throw into the mix things like that would never happen now. So hence you'll never see Gen X again, is that if I was doing something rambunctious, I was potentially doing something hazardous, it would, don't come crying to me if you hurt yourself. Or the other great one is stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. And I'm sure people of my vintage would have heard these. But again, what it demonstrated was a lack of empathy in the household.
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up thinking, I've just got to get on. I just have to do things. It's just me. It's all up to me. And there are other aspects that I could probably sit here for hours, because it's not a therapy session, that reinforce that. So let's jump now. We've moved from England to Australia. Dad thought there's a much better opportunities for his family here in Australia. And he was right. Great decision. And then I've got a part-time job at local McDonald's, and I meet Vicky, my wife, and I have to say wife because she's told me, I love being married to you, so I'm your wife. That's a bit of a joke in our household, but anyway. So we met when we were about 16, and we did the usual thing, exploring life together as a couple in our young years, and then of course progressing to getting married and then trying to have children. And of course that didn't work. Otherwise I wouldn't be here today. And one of the things that, so we jumped through all the hoops of infertility treatment, all the way from, we won't get into the gory details, but all the way from the stuff when they're checking out what's going on, all the way through to, zygote intro fertilization treatment, I think it was called at the time. One of the things that my wife will tell you in that and if you've been through, I know there's a lot of people have been through this, so I don't have to tell you what it's like, but it's a very traumatic time. And one of the things that we discuss now, and I should say, let's take a step back. No, actually, no, let's not take a step back. One of the things that we discuss openly now is about how lonely we both felt. Even though we were a couple in a house, we felt very lonely. And my wife will tell me that I thought you didn't care. And it wasn't that I didn't care, but I think now I've explained my story, I just had to get on.
Yeah.
It was not about not caring. It was about, okay, we've got to get through this. And I see that it's my role to be able to get us through this. And so that we were lucky in the respect that, no, that doesn't sound right when I explain this, but we both experienced some sexual abuse as children. Vicky's far more worse than mine. And then dysfunctional family, the childlessness took us to a psychologist, and we sat on a psychologist couch for close to 10 years, I think, because once we had finished the IVF process and had to draw that line in the sand, because it was just a really toxic roller coaster of hope. We were floundering, we were broken, and we needed to we needed to come back together again. And so we spent 10 years on the psychologist couch. And one of the things that has there's taught me is that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to talk about what is going on inside you. And that didn't happen overnight. That took a long time, and it's still difficult. Even now, I will regress back to that base behaviour that I've always regressed to sometimes, and I've got to sort of pinch myself and go, "Oh, hang on,
Yeah.
that's not the way to behave." And so that's how I guess I got to this point where we are right now, talking about what it's like to be a childless man. And so, yeah, it's not been obviously not been an easy journey, but I think, yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
But I'm in a much better place than I was 5-10 years ago, and I hope that, yeah, talking today will help both. And I'm sorry to be binary, but this is just the way that my Gen X brain works.
Yeah.
Is that help everyone in their own way understand what it's like to be a childless man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, although you've kind of touched it already, I think just because you've been talking about your relationship, I suppose one of the questions I had was, so infertility can cause relationship difficulties for couples, and actually it can really, cause relationships to break up. So how did you navigate that, you and Vicky? I mean, to sort of to be that still strong couple that you are today. How did that kind of?
It's a really good question. I'm not really sure I've got a clear answer for that. But I think from my perspective, it was about my life with Vicky, in that, she's a beautiful soul, and that's who I fell in love with. That's who I want to spend my life with.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, and so that was my way of thinking, and so that helped a lot. There was a time where Vicky felt that, I don't, what I should say, I don't talk a lot about whose fault it is, and I use that in inverted commas.
Yeah.
Because that's personal, and yeah, I don't like to talk that way. I like to talk about us as a couple.
Yeah.
And so, but one of the things that she talked about was, well, why don't leave me and go and have a life with someone else who maybe haven't had children. And I would always say, well, that's not what it's about. It was about you and me having our own.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the basis of, I think, that where we've brought that strength from, is the fact that it's just about us two, loving each other, really.
Yeah.
Now I do know that through the childless men's community that we have on Facebook, I do know some really, sad stories of that is not always the case.
Yeah.
you know, and so, but I think that 10 years on the psychologist couch helped.
Yeah.
It helped us to talk about as we like to call it, we talk about the real stuff and not just you know, not get down to the nitty gritty of what's really going on inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yeah, totally. And I think what you're saying is actually it's being able to talk to your partner about things, and that actually I know can be quite difficult, because it's difficult for everybody, but I think maybe for men, because you've kind of alluded to your upbringing, and I think, you know, that is, it's maybe not as much now, but it is that kind of, I mean, I'm sort of the same age as you and roughly, and I think, you know, that is the kind of generational stuff that we're talking about, is that kind of, you know, you don't talk about stuff, you just get on with it, or you deal with it or
Yeah.
whatever. I think there's
Yeah.
much more pressure for men to do that than
Well, I think, yeah, look, I think a lot about, again, the way that I am. I've played a lot of sport in my time. And one of the things that I recognise now is that, and I really try to challenge myself a lot. So if I cry in this session, don't worry. It's all part of my learning,
yeah.
because one of the things that men don't like to be is vulnerable, because we again, Gen X is a really good example, is we've been brought up to worship toughness. We've been brought up to worship that hard man, if you will. So as an example, I played a lot of rugby, and so I was rewarded for my physical toughness. I was rewarded that if I got hurt on the field, you know, it's like, get up and keep going. Don't let your teammates down. Come on. And that has a bearing on you. That has a bearing on your life when you think about where I've come from and you know, my foundation years. And so it's really hard to challenge that. It is really, really hard to put your hand up and go, yeah, I'm feeling vulnerable, because then it's almost like you're not being a man, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, what has been your experience of being a childless man? What is kind of your experience been like?
Actually, I'll tell you what, I've been thinking since we've talked about doing this, and
Yeah,
I've been racking my brains about what is it like, because I really don't think I haven't got the exact answer, and it's always going to change. But
yeah,
right now, what has really happened, what has happened really, sorry, not really well, but what has helped me is last Sunday we did a podcast recording, you know, with our Full Stop podcast about loneliness. And if I could sum up being a childless man in one word, that would be it.
yeah,
It is lonely. Because if you look, and actually I should preface this. Look, I acknowledge that we live in a patriarchal society. You can't deny that.
yeah, we do, yeah.
And I acknowledge that some men have and continue to do horrendous things to other human beings. But as a man living in our society today, it is very lonely because of many issues. And I know I'm going to be a bit controversial here, but one of them is that, like, we men are seen as a threat until proven otherwise. And that's the way that I feel. I understand why, and I acknowledge that. But what it does do is it leaves a man feeling very lonely. And of course, talking about my early years and about that independence and that resilience, the flip side of that is that I'm lonely inside my own head. I hope that makes sense. Because again, I feel like if there is an issue, it's all up to me. It's all up to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's a lot of men like that, that one of the things that we talk about in the childless men's community some years ago was how everyone feels so helpless because, you know, we are programmed, I guess, to be fixers. I mean, there's a reason
Yeah.
why that mansplaining thing has come around, is because men have always seen themselves as people who fix things. And even now, you know, there's a derogatory term that's now coming around, you know, you don't have to explain these things to me. And I rightly so. I mean, it insults people's intelligence. I get that. But again, now what is my role? Now who am I?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's a very lonely existence. And so when you put the go look through that through the lens of childlessness now, a really good analogy is a lot of single childless men, as an example. You know, they're trying very hard to manage their mental health, because we've already talked about the fact that they feel very lonely already.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that a childless man gets up one day and says, I want to go to the park. It's sunny, it's beautiful. I want to go and sit in a seat and just watch the world. He wants to go and see mothers playing with their children in the playground and just see some of the beauty of the world. Now, I don't think it's too much of a stretch, and men have talked about this, that if they sit there alone on a park bench in a park, men are a threat. What's he up to?
Mm-hmm.
Who's that dirty pervo? And I might be taking it to an extreme, but there are men who will tell you that they actually watch these mothers scurrying their children away from a perceived threat when it actually isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so for a childless man, again, lonely, because if we use I don't want to use warfare, that's probably not the right thing, but you know, for a childless man to put his hand up and say, you know, I'm vulnerable, it's it's not easy. It
Mm-hmm.
is just not an easy thing to do. And if I can give some advice um, to childless men, is that give yourself permission to seek help. Give yourself permission to be vulnerable, because it's not as bad as you think.
Yeah. I kind of think though that can be quite a difficult kind of for a lot of people to make that first step, isn't it? To sort of you know, and I suppose that does lead to my next question is what do you think men find most difficult about being childless not by choice?
Um, I, it's well, I guess it's multi-layered, and I'll just talk for myself, and then some of the observations I've got
Mm-hmm.
or seen. But one of them is obviously about having a relationship with a child, and nurturing that child, bringing that child up to be the best possible human they could be. That's what was in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
and is to make to not make is probably not the right word, but to nurture a child to be the best possible human they could be, to then collaborate with the rest of the population. I watch my sister; she has done that really well with her children, where, you know, she grew up in the same household I did, and this conversation we've had about my early years is very familiar to her. But she's seen her role as making as nurturing two children to be the best possible people they can be, and they have a social conscience that, for me, is actually really inspiring to see, and to observe and be part of. so there's that legacy where I use the Game of Thrones analogy here, where have you watched Game of Thrones?
I have, yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So if you look at all of the successful men, the powerful men, they've all got a lineage, they've got a family, and they will last forever. And if you look at every flawed character in that show, they
Mm,
are all childless, every one
yeah.
of them. And so it's almost like to have children is good, and is you're the best possible man you could be, and if you don't, there's something wrong with you. And so, but again, I think it has its origins in the fact that yes, men would like to see a family grow. And it's not about warfare and cutting each other up with a sword, but it's about seeing your family name travel on through the through the ages. It's
Mm,
about what you're leaving as a legacy, again. And if you nurture those children to be the best possible people they can be, then you're leaving this earth in a better place than it was before. And so, yeah, I think they're probably two of the bigger ones, and I'll probably forget some. So, and I guess that may come up in the chat. Some other guys may have some other thoughts on that.
yeah. Yeah, and we're working on questions at any time. Haven't Nobody's sort of put anything in yet, but please feel free just to put any questions in, just as you're kind of listening, anything at all. We'd be happy to get some more questions. Um, so yes, I think what you're saying there is that kind of, and I suppose it's not that different from what women want. It's that kind of whole thinking that you there's part of you carrying on in your. I think we all have that kind of dream of thinking that you're going to do the best for these imagined children that you want to have, and that you're going to, that you're leaving a sort of a legacy. And I think women still have that as well. I certainly know that as being a childless woman, that is maybe one of the things that makes me really sad, is that I have nobody to sort of kind of remember me when I'm gone. That's maybe how I look at
Mm.
it. But it's not that dissimilar to what you're saying, is that whole and I think maybe sometimes that is what I think you're saying is missed, is that I think there's a lot of assumptions made about men, isn't there, about how they'll approach childlessness, and how they're, you know, there's massive assumptions made, and actually, and possibly that is kind of like maybe difficult to get under and see, because what we're saying is that men are expected to put this front up. That's kind of really what you're saying, to portray this toughness and you know um
Yeah, that in essence, that's what it is. I can see that. I can see that changing. I look at my nephew, and I can. He will be a very different man to me,
yeah
in some respects, because of yeah, because of the way, obviously the way that we've been nurtured or not nurtured in our
yeah
early years.
yeah
So it is a really hard barrier to crack. But one of the other things, and I'm going to be quite controversial here, sorry, but it is that that loneliness that is that social isolation that men feel because of obviously the way that they brought up, and I'm talking Gen Xers again, and then the way that they're perceived by just society as a threat. All men are bastards, didn't they say once? There was a book, I'm sure, that said that. And then there's also an exclusion, an unconscious exclusion within the childless community as well. So we did a poll in the childless men's community. Now, it wouldn't stand up to any rigorous university style research, but what it did was, it actually, by far, the biggest percentage of men said, and we're talking about within the childless community, no one cares. And so that, because if you look at the childless community as a whole, there's very, very few places that actually, particularly support groups, that accept men. And again, look, I recognise and I acknowledge that why, but the result is that men feel that no one cares, because there's not even a space for them to turn up in the childless community. Because I remember I had a conversation with someone who runs an online community, and they said, well, I'm not a man, so I don't know what they want. I don't know what they need. And so I would like to say to people who are running these organisations that if you take into account what I've just said about myself, about how I was, how I feel very lonely. I won't be the only man that feels that way, of course. I mean, lots of men do. But if they're also within a subgroup of our society that don't recognise them or think they're in the too hard basket, then I think we're doing men a disservice within the childless community. Now, there are some that do, don't get me wrong, but by far, the majority groups don't. And this is why I really am proud to say that, the Full Stop podcast and the community that we're trying to build accepts anyone. Yeah. Anyone. Because we recognise that we're all in this together. Yeah. And we can all learn from each other. And so, Now, on the flip side of that, men need to take some responsibility and go, give themselves permission, as we said, give themselves permission to actually seek help, be vulnerable. It's okay. And and sort of, can we come to some middle ground? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I totally get where you're coming from. I think a lot of these groups have been the domain of women, for a long, long time. And I think there is that kind of, and to go back to the patriarchy sort of idea, we've all created it. It's not just men. We all play a part in it, no matter what gender we are. It's all of our responsibility. It's not just, to start working to kind of to break that down. So it does. I've got a wee kind of I think a statement and questions. Hi, we may have met before. You're doing so well, and I feel we are so fortunate that we can share cross-gender views in the Full Stop podcast and our community. What can people do more of to help childless men be seen in our community, childless community? And I think, can I just go on to the next bit? I have to say,
Go for it.
Really peeved me that International Men's Day UK, 19th November, leads with images around men and children. There's a lot of bias and expectation that men are fathers in the culture, as you mentioned. So that's kind of there's a wee question in there. I think you know the person that sent that.
Yeah. I do. I would like to answer that as a bit of a challenge, and say to the movers and shakers of the childless community, how I'm not quite sure what the answer is right now. As I said, I'm still learning all this myself. But how do we create a space for men to be able to feel comfortable enough to turn up in?
Yeah.
Because, and I'm going to use the World War One trench analogy because it's just the way my Gen X brain works. But if you're a man in the trenches just trying to, survive, are you going to poke your head up above the parapet and cop all this stuff that we as men get thrown to us, or are you just going to stay in the trench and just feel safe?
Yeah.
And so yeah, but I guess that's a bit of an analogy. But so how do we create that space? How do we create a space for men to feel comfortable enough to turn up in? Now men have to they too have to take some responsibility and as I said, give yourself permission to be vulnerable, because my experience is that the community that I'm in, this childless community, is probably, and this is where it gets a bit teary, is probably the most warm and empathetic community out of our whole world society that I've been exposed to so far. Because of the fact that we've all been through, can I swear? We've all been through some shit.
Yeah.
And so from that, we understand what it's like, regardless of what your gender is. We understand what it's like. There is empathy. And so, yeah, it is by far the most empathetic place to be. And so if I can encourage men to just trust me on that and feel vulnerable and seek out a place that's comfortable for them, then, that,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I would like to reinforce. But, and then on the flip side of that is, how do we as a community and how do we create that space for them to turn up in? Because one of the other things we might have to consider is that we as blokes need extra help because we don't know how to turn up there. We don't know how to be vulnerable. We don't, as I've talked about how I am, I'm lucky. I had 10 years on a psychologist's couch to help me with this. Others don't.
Yeah.
And so do we actually need a little bit more understanding and a little bit more help to actually turn up in these spaces? I'd really love to hear other men's opinion on that.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be, yeah. Because I think it probably has to come from maybe men, I think, to say, because otherwise, I think women will just be putting their lens on it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So I think maybe we do need men to sort of say that. So I've got somebody who said here, just having attended Storyhouse Childlessness last year, it helped me to see that not all men are bastards. I met the most amazing, gentle and kind men there and that I've ever met. It would be amazing for more men to attend these events. So there you go. So maybe it's getting it out there. And I think it leads me on to a question I'd like to ask you. So it's quite rare to see a childless man so visible. Why have you chosen to be visible, and how has that experience been? I'd be interested to know.
Um, I've, I, I'm a great believer in giving back in society, and so some ways I've done that is donating to charities in a big way. I spent 10 years in a volunteer rescue organisation where we would, and this was many kilos and years ago, by the way, where we would go and perform searches for people lost in the bush or rescue them from cliffs or caves, things like that. So those adventurous people that go out with half an idea and get into trouble. So I spent 10 years doing that as well. And that was very fulfilling. But, bit of weight on, bit of years on, and the whole childlessness thing raising its head, if you put all that into a bit of a mix, is where really why I'm here now, is because I want to give back. I'm not an academic. I'm not a counsellor, but I wanted to give back, and I thought, well, what's the best way of doing that? And yeah, I just thought, well, I think I'm doing okay. I know other childless men that aren't doing okay.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just about being seen. It doesn't have to be a big thing that you do. It can just be the fact of, well, people can look at you and go, oh, he's doing all right. How, like your question, how has it brought you here? How did you get here? And if I can explain that, and sometimes I can do that well, and sometimes I can't, and I'm refining that as the years go on. Yeah, so it was a need to give back, I think. But how's it been? 95% of the time it's been fantastic. It really has.
Mm-hmm.
It has shown me that the value of the community that we are part of, it is a beautiful place to be. We are the gold standard on how to treat each other as human beings, I think. But there is a 5%, and this is something I can handle. I know none others can't, but I have been the target of some trolling in the past by some very unscrupulous people, because one particular instance, I remember I was interviewed for a piece with the ABC, which is like your BBC equivalent.
Yeah.
And the guy who interviewed me for that, brilliant, really empathetic. We he checked with me everything he wanted to say. And when we did the interview, he said, what is it you want people to leave, thoughts with? And I said, well, look, if this big, fat, hairy, gruff guy can do this, then anyone can. And I thought that was funny. And I thought it was like a good way to end it, keeping it real, so to speak. But I was getting comments like, well, what sort of role model are you, if you're overweight and fat and things like that. And I thought, well, I won't tell you what I thought, but I can handle that fairly well, because I just see that as their problem. There's something wrong with them. And so, but yeah, look, I can understand how that can, other people can't handle that. But as I said, 95%, it's a beautiful place to be. It really is.
I've got a question here, and I don't know, we've maybe kind of skirted around it or talked a wee bit about it, but how do you offer childless men support? What do you think they want people to do to support them? What would you have, or what did you find most helpful, I suppose? If you know somebody who's in that situation, what do you
So
think?
one of the things, I'm going to draw my experience now, being part of one of the founders of the Childless Men's Community Facebook group. So we've got a closed Facebook group, got about 350 men from around the world on that.
Yeah.
And so my observations in there are that by far a lot of men have said, this is very common, I thought I was the only one that felt this way. When they talk about how their feelings and their childlessness, again, let's talk about that loneliness. This is another aspect of that, where I thought I was the only one that felt this way, and I'm so glad I found this group. And for some, that's enough. That is all they need. all they need to know is, I'm not the odd one out.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they can make sense of that. Now, of course, others need that they are more engaged in the group. Now, I don't want you to think that this group is a hive of activity, because it's not. And I think it's very reflective of the way that men behave. They dip in and out when they need to.
Mm-hmm.
And just knowing there is a place to belong is enough.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, but of course, there are others that need more help. Of course, we can't we can't give that, because it's just a peer support group.
Yeah.
But of course, we would always encourage people to go and seek, professional help if they're, finding it tough. And some guys do find it tough. And so, yeah, I think in a nutshell, that's what men need. Men just need that place to feel that they belong. And again, this is where I get back to about the wider childless community and saying that, yeah, all men need right now as a starting point is a safe place to turn up in.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah. I think I've got a wee comment here. I don't think it's a question to it. It just says it often feels like a minority of people want to find an excuse to blame childless people for being childless because they can't deal with their own discomfort. And I think anybody who's childless will have definitely had at least one experience of that, if not hundreds. I even know, people ask me, do you have kids? And I say, no, you can see them. No, I wasn't looking up to it. You can see them sort of squirming away as if to say, well, I don't know what to say next,
I I'll make sure I word this right. I've got a bit of a mischievous streak in me where I actually use that to an advantage, if you will. So I feel very passionate about being a childless man, in that I want people to know that I am a childless man. I don't want them to know that I'm a child-free person, because that is a totally different way of existing in the world.
Yeah.
I want people to know that. Now, with that independence and resilience that we talked about comes a little bit of strength. And so what I do if I get to that situation is I make them feel more discomfort, but in a way that, and I give them avenues. So if they ask me, oh, do you have children? And I'll say, well, no, sadly, I don't. We tried for many years to have them, and it didn't work. But I'm more than happy to talk about it if you'd like to.
Yeah.
And I give them a choice. And it's that mischievous part of me where, right, now the ball's in your court. What do you want to do? You want to talk about it, or you want to walk off? Now it's all about you.
Yeah.
And so
I'm actually,
I know the people here will understand that.
Yeah. And actually, I know there is a mischievous part to it, but it's actually an adult way of dealing with it, is to own your stuff and, let other people kind of, deal with whatever it is that why they've asked that question. Do you know, I think that is an adult way to deal with it, is to put the ball back in their court. Yeah.
Yeah, I had the occasion to talk to my sister-in-law. Now, lovely lady, lives up the coast a little bit from us, and she's always quite curious about childlessness and what I'm up to. And she goes, I met a woman who doesn't have kids once. Oh yeah, tell me how that went. And she said, oh well, we were talking at work, and she said, oh yeah. The woman said, oh look, I'm sadly I don't have any children. So I said, what did you do after that? Oh, change the subject. Oh, did you really? So again, that mischievous streak in me went, well, Sandy, let me put it to you a different way. This woman offered to you one of the biggest things in her life.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how big this is because you watch what I get up to. You know about Vicky and my story, and you totally dismissed her.
Mm-hmm.
She was mortified because she never thought about it in that perspective. But yeah, I chalked that up as a bit of a win because I thought,
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, I can be a bit mischievous at times.
So, another comment here, a wee question. You're an inspiration to many people. Which people inspire you, Michael?
I'm going to get her back for that comment because that's bringing the tears up. I there are so many people that inspire me, and I could be here all day. But I would have to say Vicky, my wife, because I know her story so intimately, and we often talk about how her life could have been so different without going into the gory details. And so she inspires me greatly. Then I have to say my two co-presenters of the Full Stop podcast, Berenice and Sarah, they're two very different people, but they help me to see the world in a different way. And so then there's, which I really appreciate, and I really enjoy the depth of the friendship we have, and I'm really excited about where the depth of that relationship will go in the future. Andy Harrod is my co-founder of the Childless Men's community. Inspires me. People like Robert Nurden, who have got the courage to write a book, and I bow to Robert's courage because what he's put in that book is just, I'm not quite even sure I could put that in that book, to be honest. A lot of courage shown in his book, always wanted to be a dad. And sorry if I've got that wrong, Robert, but yeah, people can research your name, Robert Nurden. And yeah, there's a guy, Russell Patter, down here in Australia, who's also part of the Childless Men's community. I know I can say his name because he's he's a very visible man, and so yeah, so many, so many. And I'm sorry if I've forgotten your name, but I am nervous.
It's okay. How did you become? So you mentioned the Childless podcast. How did you become part of the Childless podcast? How did that happen?
Well, I think I think it obviously runs in parallel with my own visibility, where one of the ways that I started trying to give back was I started a blog called Married and Childless, and which was started on the side of the I-10 in northern Florida, actually, when we was on a holiday. How does that happen? I don't know, but that was when I wrote my first piece to it. And then we sort of fell into the childless community. Well, no, immersed ourselves into the childless community, finding support groups. And the one that has to take credit for that would be Steph Phillips, the founder of World Childless Week, her Childless Path to Acceptance group, where we were able to, again, find people just like us, made us feel like we weren't alone, because it took us 10 years to get out of that hole that IVF had created.
Yeah.
And it was a hard slog to get out of that. And so, yeah. And so that put me in touch with lots of different people. And then 2018, we had the opportunity to come to the United Kingdom. We were on holiday, but Jessica Hepburn's Fertility Fest was on exactly the same time.
Yeah.
And so I said to Vicky, "Oh, let's go." She looks at me and goes, "What the hell are we going to go to Fertility Fest for? Are you serious?" said, no. There's a day for us. There's a day for childless people. So she trusted me with that. And yeah, we went and we met so many people. That's where I met Berenice. I met Steph Phillips, and so many other people.
Yeah.
Jodie Day, of course, Jessica Hepburn, and so for that, so I got to meet a lot of people, and
Yeah.
so of course the the blog was going along as well, and the one thing that and I might cry in a minute, but after that day at Shepherd's Bush for the Fertility Fest, we had sat around the bar and had a few drinks. Then we went looking for something to eat, and we were walking down the street, and Vicky, usually by my side, she was nowhere to be seen. I thought, well, where's she gone? And here she was with a group of women, and all hugging together, crying. And for the very first time I ever heard Vicky say, I feel like I belong. And so I'm actually quite proud of myself that I've kept the emotions down for that one, because I usually get a bit teary. But yeah, so that it sort of encouraged me to do more. And then I think it might have been Berenice come up with the idea of a podcast. I get this message and say, would you like to be part of it? And my attitude to life is, hell yeah, let's see where this goes. And here we are, 5 years later, 60 episodes. It has enriched my life in ways that I could never have imagined.
Yeah.
As we explore the different avenues of what it is to be in the childless community.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've got another question for you, Michael. Is that okay if we move to that?
Yeah, sure.
This is such a fantastic event. I'd love to ask Michael if he's finding many men from the LGBTQ plus community getting in touch, involved with the Childless Men's Network.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we have many men who identify as gay in the group, which is fantastic. And again, it really gives us a great perspective on what it means to be what it means to be in the LGBTQ community and being childless. We have trans men as well, which is another. It took a long time for them to sort of, I guess, be seen in the group, for obvious reasons. But because what we usually do is we say to people, well, look, in your own time and way, introduce yourself to the group. And because I see the questions that are answered to be part of the group come in, I know who's there. And it really, I sent one trans man actually a message when he finally introduced himself. I was saying how happy I was, because I said, mate, I've been waiting forever for you for you to do this, and it's fantastic to see you. And it also gives us the opportunity to educate as well.
Yeah.
Now this is probably not the this is probably not a good example of being a human, but I got a private message from one of the group members and said that you've got a gay man in the group. What's he doing in the group? Because he obviously doesn't want kids because he's gay. And I thought, this is like the 2020s. What the hell? And so there was a great opportunity for me to educate someone, to say, just because that is how this man identifies, has no bearing, absolutely no bearing on his desire to be a parent. Yeah, it went a bit deeper than that, but we'll just leave it at that. But yeah, it's again a fulfilling thing to see that we've created a space for however you identify as a man, or whoever you are as a man, can come in here and feel safe. And yeah, great place to be.
Yeah. And that's your Facebook group. Does it have a title?
Yeah, it's called the Childless Men's Community.
Childless Men's Community.
And so what will happen if you go to that site or go to that Facebook group, you'll have to answer a few questions, because of course, like, we want to make sure that you are the right person for the group, and we have had to turn away some people.
Yeah.
Because it is about acceptance of being childless. It's not about trying. It's not we don't accept you if you're still trying. It's about having a space for people to help them with their acceptance.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, we have a More to Life group, Facebook group, that everybody's welcome to, whether you're whatever gender you are. I would say though that I think probably the majority of members are women. We do have a few men, but it sounds like it's really good to have that space where it is for men and those people who identify as male. So
yeah, I look at the way that I like to think about it, because I'm not aware of the irony of me sitting here going, give a place for men to turn up in, and I've got a group of, I have a group that's only men. I'm not immune to that. But the way I like to think about it is like a stepping stone.
Yeah.
Is that men can, I guess, feel comfortable in that area, be exposed a bit more to the childless community, and then perhaps they move on to other groups that are more inclusive.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just wondering if there's anybody who's got any questions that we'd still like to ask of Michael. Before we I think that's been about an hour now, so I don't know, Michael, if you're thinking that might be unless there's other things you want to say, or people got questions, we could maybe just sort of look to finish it up in the next sort of few minutes. But I think we'd both be open to if anybody has any sort of questions they still want to ask.
Oh, yeah. Look, please. I hope you've seen that I'm a bit of an open book when it comes to this thing. So, yeah, ask away. I'm not afraid to answer questions.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I'll talk all day. So you've been warned.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any. Is there any more questions? While we're I might just ask you one more question if you don't mind, while we're waiting to see if anybody else has got. Do you think men approach being childless differently from women? Do you think they do, or I don't know, what do you think about that?
I hope this is a good enough answer, but I'll talk about myself in that I think there is a difference in the when I think about being a dad, I think about how and I know this sounds horrible, it's the gender roles, the whole bit, but again, Gen X brain. I always saw that Vicky would be the person to nurture our children and to be the person who looked after their early life. And then it would be my role to then make them world ready, if that makes sense, is to give them some balanced resilience and independence. And so because I think in pictures and analogies, that's the best way I think I could explain that. For me, I can't speak for anyone else because I don't have that level of detail. But for me, it was about, because I always saw babies as too high maintenance. It was like, oh, that's just way too much maintenance there. But I saw that I had the skills to be able to make them world ready. And so, yeah, if there's a difference, that's the way that it would be for me, if that makes sense. And of course, lots of other things will play into it for other people, but for me, that was the way it is. And I always saw my measure of success as I have this recurring dream, if you will, where my son, and his name would have been Michael, by the way, because my dad's Michael, his dad's Michael, his dad's Michael, and so's his, and so's his, and so's his. Goes all the way back to County Tyrone in Northern Ireland. About 300 years, I think it is. But he would come over to come and see his dad. We'd sit in the back garden, and he'd go, "Dad, I've got a problem. I need to talk to you about." Okay, what's that? And I never got that with my dad, never ever, because he would always tell me what to do, and I saw my role as saying, "Okay, tell me what it is," and we would talk through it, and he would come to his own conclusion. I would help him come to his own solution to the problem, rather than me telling him what to do. And yeah, so I always saw that as a measure of success for that, that difference, if you will.
We've got one more question. Are people aware of any good representations of childless experience in popular culture, books, TV, shows, films, etc.? I'm not sure. I don't know if I can think of anything off the top of my head.
Popular culture, wow. Look, apart from let's say Robert Nurdon's book, I Always Wanted to Be a Dad, then there's not much you see shining us in a positive light. I alluded to the Game of Thrones analogy that I like to use. That is what I see all the time.
Yeah.
And this is why, and I told you I could talk all day. This is why it's so important from my perspective to grab hold of the word childless and make it mean something.
Yeah.
So because what really worries me is that we have people, and look, this is their right. I'm not saying this is not their right to do, but we have people that have had a childless life and then feel that they need to now progress to say, well, I'm child-free.
Yeah.
Now, that's their right to do that. I'm not arguing about that. But the flip side of that is that we are not educating the world about what it means to be childless. We are still saying it's something of less than. It's lower social standing because I've now achieved child freeness. And I know I'm going to upset some people, but I just think it's a load of bollocks. Where we need to start educating the world about what it means to be childless, so they understand what it means, and then we can perhaps have those who can create popular culture content and shine us in a different light, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
no,
I'm sorry I didn't answer that question very well, but yeah, you
no.
got me on the bandwagon again.
No, I can't think of, no, I think that's a good answer. I can't think of any, because what I was thinking about was that, the Margaret Atwood book where, the childless people, I can't remember what it's called now, oh, that's dreadful. But anyway, and
Is that the one they made a TV show about?
Yeah, yeah.
I can see the woman. I can see the
Yeah,
poster
I
for it.
know.
But
It's dreadful. But anyway, childless people are not portrayed well in that. They're seen as being, kind of like torturing these. So yeah, no, I think you're right. And I've got somebody saying, I totally agree, Michael, about communicating with the world about childlessness at large. I think there is something about getting people to kind of have a better understanding of what that means, you know. Yeah. So
Yeah, look, I think we're at a point now where there's so much going on. 10 years ago, there was not much going on at all. But now there's so many groups, so many people trying to be visible in the childless space that we now have, I think it's the prime time to now start to dictate the narrative of what it means to be childless.
yeah, yeah. It was the Handmaid's Tale, the book.
That
But yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I think, Michael, I think maybe on that kind of note, I think maybe we should say thank you very much to you. It's been fantastic. It's been a really good kind of like hour and a bit, yeah. So we're getting lots of thank yous coming in. Thank you to Michael for all you do. You're an inspiration. Yeah, we're getting lots of thank yous. So that's been really, really brilliant. Um,
No, look, I thank you for the opportunity. As you can see,
yeah.
sorry, Mason's got there. I think that's yeah, look, I don't, as a bloke, I don't mind doing the crying thing. I'm very comfortable with that now because it's part of my
Yeah.
journey to acceptance and to be vulnerable. But you can't help but feel that when you know what everyone else has been through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the opportunity.
yeah, it's
Um,
been
and
fabulous. And we'll be putting it out as a recording later on once I get my act together about Zoom. Yeah.
or look, it's just all about keeping current, you know.
Sorry?
It's all about keeping current
Yeah,
with technology.
totally, Ricky.
All right. Again, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop recording. Thanks everyone for attending. Oh no. There we go. Stop.